You're listening to Happy Hour Hustle from the creative geniuses here at 834. We're funny, informative, and we swear. We talk all things marketing, communication, small business, plus we offer up hot takes on our industry and whatever else we feel like talking about. So, grab your drink of choice. It's always 5 o'clock at 834. And crank it up.
Well, Happy New Year, hustlers. We're recording this right after, this is like the beginning of January. So, we're all feeling really excited about the new year, like new year, new us. Like we made a bunch of resolutions that we're not going to keep. We're going to be disappointed in February or maybe March if you carry on that long. Well, way to go. You should really read our anti-resolution blog. It's at 834.com in case you wondered. Today, anyway, we're going to talk about crisis management and crisis communication. I have Maddie with us.
Hey.
Maddie, people know who you are, but introduce yourself again for any new listeners we might have.
Yeah, my name's Maddie. Some of you may recognize my name from working at Wood TV for the last 5 years before I came here. So I have a background in media, specifically in seeing a lot of people do crisis communications, good and bad, in the area. So I have a unique perspective on this, looking at it now from mostly bad, let's be honest. Just talk to us. Come on.
Yeah. And that's really, this kind of came about because we were talking about, okay, if any of you are keeping, up to date on what's going on in the news, which you should, it should be like, just download the Apple News, or if you have a Google phone, I don't know what to tell you, but go to Google and whatever, and just read what's going on, just for all of us, just be informed. That would be fantastic. The world would be a better place. But I brought this up. We were talking about this earlier this week. So the most recent Harvard professor, now the shortest term of any Harvard professor, is stepped down after 6 months. The sad thing is she was the first Black female to be in that role. I'm not sure if she was the first female. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but first Black female. And she did it amidst blowback of plagiarism and anti-Semitism. And it's interesting because if you really dig into it, the plagiarism was never proven. In fact, she was backed by Harvard itself.
Yep.
And then also, she came out afterwards. She was not prepared. She testified in front of like a Senate committee or a House committee. And she was not prepared essentially for the questions they were going to ask, which she absolutely should have been, because it was not a surprise what they were there to talk about. They were literally there to talk about like rising, Semitism.
Yep.
On college campuses and what's being done to address it. And is that would that classify or be, would that be hate speech? And for whatever reason, she was there with two other university presidents, one who has also resigned in the wake of this. That just they couldn't answer the questions. They just kept going back to policy. And it's a great lesson in like crisis communication, because you should never have a crisis communication plan after a crisis. You should always have it before. I say this all the time, and then we're going to go into like, I really want to talk to Maddie. I'm going to ask her a bunch of questions about like the media perspective on this kind of stuff. I can tell you what you need to do on a PR side. We can tell you what you need to do on a PR side, but I think it's a lot more impactful coming from somebody who's been in the media, not just for the last 5 years either. Like she was in media before that, and then media before that. I've seen her resume. It's impressive. So, but I will go back to the great Kelly Rossman, one of my mentors and idols, would always say, own it, acknowledge it, apologize. There is no other way around it. Own, apologize, fix. Own, apologize, fix. So own it, apologize for it, and fix it. Remember oath. Like, I feel like you can remember that. And that's literally, you could make it much more complicated than that, but it's always about owning it. It's not about saying, you own your part in it. To be clear, you own your part in it. You're not taking full, like, depending on the crisis, you might not need to take full responsibility for what happened, but you're absolutely owning your role in it. And then you're going to apologize, whatever that may look like. And please consult your PR firm, because you don't know how to apologize in public. I will just tell you that now.
Guaranteed.
And then you're going to talk about what you're going to do to ensure that you're never in this position again. And that's
Yeah.
it. That's really what the media wants to hear from you. Well, they want to dig a little bit more into why the
Yeah,
hell.
there's a lot of things.
Yeah. So anyway, I
Yeah.
want to talk to Maddie a little bit.
Yeah.
Maddie, talk to me about you're covering a crisis, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Use a
Yeah.
hypothetical, or you can give a real example, whatever you want
Sure.
to do. And what's the first thing you do as a media, as a journalist?
I mean, I would say the first thing we do is go confirm the truth of it. I mean, a lot of times it's people coming to you with tips about things, like something that went wrong. From a small example of, there was a nail in my burger at Burger King. Something similar to that happened. We got a tip about that. Make sure it's true. Confirm the details about it. And then obviously you want to talk to the person giving you the tip, confirm that that's a thing. But then there's also on a larger level, like if something breaks, like I was in Lansing when all the stuff with Larry Nassar was happening and that was all going down. I mean, those are things like there are times when I guess a company could hold off on, getting their line out there. In those cases, you need to respond immediately.
Yes.
You need to have someone available, especially if you're an institution like Michigan State or like USA Gymnastics. You can't hold off on responding to these types of things, especially when they're proven to be true and over again. And I think and to the credit of those organizations, I think there were things they did right. I think there were things they did wrong that they have
I
since
would
admitted that they have done wrong
I
in
would
handling
like
of things like
I
that.
would like to say MSU. I'm not going to give them any credit because they handled it horribly. They actually continually are continuing to handle it horribly.
Mm,
And then they had another crisis with Mel Tucker that they also handled poorly.
mm,
So they did not learn. They have not put into practice own apologize fix. Um, Hopefully the next crisis that they face will happen. But they did not deal. They're a great case study and absolutely what not to do.
yeah,
This was a predator that they basically hid for years. There was some massive impact, and he hurt a lot of people. So Michigan State, absolutely, I have no problem saying it on this podcast, and maybe the three listeners here did wrong, like absolutely did wrong. But it's a
yeah,
good case study and what not to do.
yeah. Well, and I think specifically that one impacted me so much because it was, I just moved to Lansing and it was such a big national story that so many things were breaking locally and then being covered nationally. And that's something too that I think is hard to understand is that a lot of people in other parts of the country that are hearing the story are getting like very large swaths of detail about it that isn't all the reporting. Like the
Yeah.
stuff we did was so much bigger than the story CNN ended up doing in it
Yeah.
on any given day.
Yeah.
And the things that we were able to like uncover. And so, I mean, as a organization, when you're thinking of crisis communications, like you need to really get out in front of what the story is. Otherwise, those big organizations, like or like the big national media organizations, they're gonna get like the three facts from it and run with that. And they're
They're
not
going
gonna
to
do
create their own narrative.
well, and they're
They
not gonna do the local follow-up that's done. Like perhaps we'll cover the 5 apologies post any kind of crisis, but they'll probably do the story about the scandal. And if it's big enough, the follow-up, but that's probably it, especially when it's things on a smaller scale and not a national university. But
it's
you want to be able to be in the same byline saying this apology happened right after this tragedy happened or this bad thing. If not, people aren't going to look up the follow-up article. You really want to be able to say it in the same breath as the bad thing that happened. Here's how the company responded.
You should
And
be
if
prepared immediately when you're talking
yeah,
to media to know what to say, that it's not just like, yeah, this happened. It's
yeah,
literally, again, its own apologize fix. And I would like to point out one thing you said that I think is so true is those stories are broke locally. That story
mhm,
was broke by a former GVSU
mhm,
journalism student who worked in Indianapolis.
mhm,
She broke that story and then it blew up. We
yeah,
actually had her come and talk to GVSU. She did a public event at the downtown campus,
mhm,
which I'm annoyed there were not more people. It was a good show. A lot of people showed up, but
yeah.
she's the reason that story saw
And she
the light of day.
stayed on it. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. No,
Yeah.
it was really impressive.
Yeah.
No, and yeah, it's just interesting too to see. I feel like a lot of times the reaction of companies is that we want to get all of our ducks in a row and get together a really good thing to send out there.
Mhm.
I do think that's important to make sure
Yes.
that you're responding correctly, but I do also think you have to move fast.
Yes. If you get caught in the bureaucracy, nothing's going to get out, and
Yeah.
you're going to portray your company and the leadership as not caring. You've gone radio silent. This
Yeah.
has happened. You're not saying anything.
Yeah.
And the media is unforgiving. And,
Yeah.
and to a certain extent, they should be. And
Yeah.
the other thing is you need to be prepared for this ahead of time.
Mhm.
Like you cannot possibly like predict a tragedy or a crisis, but you
Mhm.
absolutely can have a process on how to respond to it. You know
Mhm.
the main contacts. You have you have a contact chart or whatever. You know who you need to
Absolutely.
talk to. You know who needs to approve it. It really should be one person who is always reachable, and then
Mhm.
you need to have somebody like a PR consultant or somebody that's on there that says yes, 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 yes. This is what you say. I'm going to get it out right now.
Yep.
And it cannot be stuck in
Yeah.
a board decision. This isn't a committee decision. This isn't a board decision. This is like, we need to protect the integrity of our company
Mhm.
and absolutely like our reputation.
Yeah.
And if we don't get something out, again, look at MSU, then what the hell?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I think that's important to know. And my other thing that I was going to say, which plays off of what you were saying, is if a crisis happens, the first thing you need to do is anticipate any questions that will be asked of you, and imagine every horrible, awful question you don't want to respond to,
Mhm.
and you better have an answer to it, and it better not be no comment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think one of the most frustrating things from being being a member of the media and covering things that happen is when you get we're not sure. Like, if there's something happening and you're going to come at me with we don't know the answer to that at this
Welcome to
moment, you should
the
have known.
doghouse. Yeah.
Especially when it's, I would say, like in situations where like lawmakers are trying to do things, like you're trained for that, and we know you are. And I think that was one thing, that it comes off really disingenuous too when you have answers like that. And I will say, even like if you are like for PR people, even being able to say like, hey, we're gathering the facts, like if it's a
Yep.
breaking news type thing, we're gathering the facts, but we'll give you an update at this time.
Yes. Yep. And
I like,
if as a PR person, sometimes you're going to say, hey, I know Maddie. I know
mm,
she's going to give this the proper attention. I know she's going to pay attention to detail. She's going to want to really, truly understand this before she goes, before she reports on it. Then
mhm.
make sure you talk to her first,
Yeah.
if you have a good, and you should have a relationship with the PR
Hmm.
person is the person that's going to have a good relationship. They're going to be the one that can tell you, I know who's going to tell this story well, and I know who's going to like not side with us, but will make sure that they have all the facts. And then you go to that person, but also
Yeah.
do not sit around and take hours and hours. And to Maddie's point, like, pick up the phone and call that person and say, listen, I know what you need. I'm getting it. And I want you to know you'll be the first person that gets it.
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, it really, to me, and like I just want to go back to the being human response to things. When it's something bad that's happened, it's okay to put emotion into that. Like, say when there's something tragic, it's tragic, although I do think that word is overused. And when something is like gut-wrenchingly bad, it's okay to show that emotion and to be angry and be sad, because that's what you should be when bad things happen. And now not every situation calls for that kind of language, but I think that being really transparent with people, something they appreciate. I mean, everyone
Well,
gets everything
MS,
instantly.
MSU also had the shooting, and
Yeah.
like, you that is personal. You need
Yeah.
to say this. We are devastated. We are absolutely crushed by this. And
Yep.
that person who's going to relay that message,
Hmm.
they better feel it.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, there should be tears.
Yeah.
Like, if you're talking about something like this that has hurt the
Yeah.
student body, that has hurt families, that is,
Yeah.
like irrevocably changed like multiple people's lives, then you should feel that. And
Hmm.
that needs to come across.
Yeah. And I will say, to their credit, at least as I was still in news when that all happened. I did feel that that day um there was good communication. We got updates we needed. And at that point, it was really a public safety thing too, because the shooter was still out there and people were freaking out. And so they knew it wasn't just a matter of, we can't give this information. It's, we need to give this information so that people can keep themselves safe and their
I
families
was
safe and their kids safe.
I do feel like they handled that well. Maybe they
Yeah.
just don't handle anything in sexual nature well, or anything that's like,
Yeah.
horrific in that regard.
Yeah.
Maybe they just, but
Yeah.
they did handle that. They handled that. I felt they handled that well because there was constant updates, to your point.
Yeah. I do think it's different too. And these are like two different types of crises,
Yes.
right? Like there's something breaking where like the only fault it is the person who
Yes.
did that awful thing, right?
Yes.
Where
Yeah.
like with the stuff with Larry Nassar, which again, there's been reports on this, there people at the university did things wrong that allowed that to happen,
They
right?
knew. A lot of
So
them knew.
so when you're trying to when you have to admit fault in a crisis, I think it makes it harder than when you're just trying to handle something that's almost externally happening to you. I think
Yep.
companies have a lot more harder time, companies, organizations, government, whatever, when there's something that they've done wrong, it's always going to be harder for them to reconcile and really admit to that because your instinct's not to say like I did something wrong because also people don't like hearing that.
No.
But owning up to stuff allows for the forgiveness process to happen earlier. Then when it's an external factor happening to you, crisis communications is just as important, but it's just a different beast.
Well, and I think to your point, like taking ownership of it is what people will remember. Because what were you saying before we started recording? You were saying that people will remember the bad stuff.
Yeah.
That always
Yeah.
sticks with people. There's like a study or something out there, but people remember
Mhm.
the bad stuff before they remember the good.
Yeah.
And so it's all how you handle it, and it's all about accountability. You
Mhm.
better own your role in whatever this crisis was. And if
Yeah.
you didn't take the proper steps while it happened, like what happened with, Nassar, like
Mhm.
then you need to absolutely show. And that's where the you own it, you
Mhm.
apologize for it, and you fix it. And I think where some people are lacking in the crisis communication or crisis, management is the fixing it.
Yeah.
Is they're not, they'll sure, we'll own it, we'll apologize, it'll be half-assed, but we'll do
Yeah.
it. And then
Yeah.
you're not fixing it. Because if
Yep.
you can show people that you fixed it, if you can't show
Mhm.
people that you learned from this,
Mhm.
then quite frankly, you are, like you deserve to be.
Yeah. And I'll say this too, like on things I was not immediately involved with on either end of it, but I was as I was researching stuff for this, some of the top things that came up were like the Pepsi commercial from 2017, that
Was that
one,
with
and like
Kendall Jenner?
with
Yeah.
Kendall Jenner, and then like the Tide Pod situation and all these.
Yes.
And what struck me is that I knew all those things happening at that point, right? Like
Yep.
I knew all these, and I even might remember some of the response, but most of what I just remembered is that these awful things were happening and everyone was pissed at these companies.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
even though they did have responses at the time, I couldn't remember that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you just think like perspective.
I think about Bud Light and their first trans commercial, and
Yeah.
how instead of like ignoring like the racism and the, the hate that was out there, and quite frankly saying, hey, whatever, we support it.
Mhm.
We're ignoring you. They looked absolutely guilty,
Mhm.
because they pulled the commercial. They pulled anything mentioning that person, and that was approved at some point. That strategy was decided on. They said, we're going to appeal to this community. We think this community is important. And what you did is now you got people pissed off on both sides. And
Yeah.
so it was absolutely the wrong way to deal with
Yeah.
the crisis. So, but
Yeah. And there, and you know what? Sometimes there is, and I think when I was reading through these things, like what Pepsi did was they did end up pulling the commercial
yeah,
because they did a response, and then they ended up pulling the commercial after people got even more pissed off at the response. And in that case, perhaps that was the right move. Like
yeah, I
when there's
think
that
it
much thing,
was.
I'm not going to say like every time giving into, whatever the public opinion is right, but when enough people think something is bad,
Yes.
perhaps it's bad.
I would like to also, yeah, absolutely that. Yep, that. And I think, God, I just lost my train of thought, but like going back to that, and like, going back to the planning aspect, you have got to have a plan for this stuff. Like
Mhm.
it's, and what I love is I've had a client say like, they've come to us and, I said, crisis planning to put this together. This is what it costs. And they're like, well, that's really expensive. And I said, what's more expensive? A crisis and not handling it correctly. That's more
Mhm.
expensive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other like people. Well, also I would like, can we just cancel the Kardashians? Like, why was she even in that commercial? Can we just cancel it? Like, I'm just, you know what that reminds me of? And nobody remembers this. Quiznos did a commercial, and they had like these dancing rats. They like suddenly, they weren't rats, to be fair. They weren't. I don't know what they were. They were gross. They looked like rodents. And it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And somebody approved that and was like, this is good. We should put these gross looking rodent things next to our food and they'll be singing. And I think it's going to really sell us some subs. And I just think, who are the people that are approving this shit? Do you not have the right people around the table? Or do you not have people that are willing to speak up and tell you when you're wrong? And that's a whole nother podcast we should really talk about, because if you're going to run a company and refuse to have people around you that are going to tell you, that be truthful and honest with you, and will have differing opinions, and will say like, you're making this decision, you know, and it's wrong. It's just wrong. And this is why it's wrong. And this is what we should do instead. And if you refuse, you surround yourself with yes people, then it comes back to leadership. It's poor leadership.
When you said Quiznos, it also just reminded me of another big one. Jared at Subway.
Yes. Yeah.
But I will say, if there's someone that I think built their reputation back up, I've eaten Subway in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. I would like to also say that about Monica Lewinsky. Like, if you follow her on Twitter, you know what she's done is what she got was not what she deserved whatsoever. No, typical sexism. She walked away being absolutely like destroyed. She was destroyed. I am actually shocked that she's even back in the public eye.
And funny.
Yeah, it's hilarious. You know, she's taken it and she's turned it. And like, granted, it's decades later. But it to me is, that shows like, you know, integrity, that shows strength.
There's a really good John Oliver talked to her for a thing about public shaming, like a episode. I watched it recently, but love him. He talked to her about the fact that like, and this is one of those things too, public versus like private citizens. And this is another podcast too, like how much, and this is something media considers a lot, like how much anger do you really want to inspire against someone who did not purposely put themselves in the public eye? Like, that's why lawmakers, super fair game, right? Like,
absolutely.
They get voted for in office, that sort of thing. But when you're not that, it could be really dangerous, and you're not asking for it. And so like, she's one of those examples of, yes, it did happen with like the most famous man on the planet, perhaps, but at the same time, he didn't get half of what she did.
Oh, no, not at all. And then what you did see is them going after his wife, Hillary. So it's like, he really just skated on by, and we won't get into misogyny and sex, because quite frankly, there's not enough time. And we don't have decades to, to rehash everything. But it just goes to show, like, you know, the struggles that women face every single day. Like, you know, if you go and if you've been a victim of sexual assault and you go and report it, you are treated as if you are the perp. And, you know, and it's not a safe place. You know, it's not safe for us we don't feel safe going to law enforcement. We don't feel safe, you know, talking to, you know, like we just don't. So I think that's a whole nother topic, but I'm very impressed with the way she handled it, and quite frankly, the way Hillary Clinton handled it. And love her or hate her, you know, she's smart, and you absolutely cannot deny that. Like, I don't care who you are, you know, the woman is smart. So smarter than by the way. So
and talk about like a way to, and I think reputation management is just one part of crisis communications. Like, people always think like, oh, I put out a statement, responded to the media, that's fine. It's like, no, you have to manage your reputation then, probably depending on the severity of it, for a while afterwards.
You should have somebody managing your reputation all the time. You should have social listening set up. You should have media listening set up. You should have people that, you know, they're monitoring how people are talking about you on Reddit, on, you know, the internet, in chat rooms. I don't know if that's even something people say anymore, but you know, you have to be monitoring that. That's like being proactive, you know, after releasing a statement after a crisis and not having a plan in place, that's reactive. It's the worst thing you could do for your company. And I just can't, it's going to be more expensive for you to be reactive in a crisis than it is to be proactive and to think like, you know, what's important.
Yeah.
We pay for health insurance, hoping we never have to use it. It's the exact same thing when it comes to reputation management and crisis management. You pay for it. You're prepared for it. You hope you don't have to use it, but you're sure as hell glad you did when it happens.
And I will say too, like when it comes to crisis communication plans, because like I always like to think of what someone would respond to me when I say do this, but people saying like, well, you can't predict every crisis. No, but you can literally lay out when something happens, this is the person that's going to respond. Like if something were to happen about this, this is like, perhaps you could have never predicted someone would have eaten Tide Pods, but having someone in place when that does happen the first time and putting out messaging immediately should be something you already have a plan for.
You can't predict how stupid humanity is, but you should know that they are stupid. And at some point, something very odd is going to happen and you may have to deal with it. So to your point, you got to have a process. You know, you talk about process all the time when you run a company, like there should be a process here. There should be a process for your reputation management. Hell, you could have probably, if they had listening in place, they would have known that like this was blowing up on TikTok or wherever it blew up, and they could have got out ahead of it. Like, and that's what is crazy to me is that people don't put this listening in place. These big brands don't have somebody that's actively like, you know, monitoring it, you know, monitoring social media. There are tools out there to do it. You know, I don't care how much you pay for it. You should be doing it because that's proactive. But you know, and a lot of PR firms do have the ability to do that. We have the ability to do that through programs we have, but you know,
and like the same thing to that point, like people are gonna say stuff about brands on social media that you don't need to respond to. Like not everything is a crisis. I'm not trying to say that. But I do think like you take things into consideration, like the size of the brand. If 50 people are saying something negative about Pepsi, that's probably okay. But if you're a small company and 50 people locally are saying something bad about you, that's a crisis.
Yes. It's because all perspective.
Because that's a big portion of the people you're trying to serve. So it really like taking that all into consideration.
Well, and I think too, and to your point about you don't have to respond to everything, you know, we always tell our clients when it comes to social media, if there's a negative comment that's posted, we wait for somebody else to come to their defense. If that doesn't happen within 24 hours, then we're going to respond. But you know, what's a hell of a lot more powerful is if somebody that uses your product is coming to defend you than you defending yourself, because that comes off as, you know, defensive. Like, so what did we learn here today, folks?
What did we learn? Shall we recap?
Don't be reactive, be proactive. Reputation management should be part of your strategy, which includes preparing for a crisis and having a plan for it and knowing who the key figures are and being able to react quickly no matter what happens.
And be a human.
Be a human. You got to be a human. When these big companies just release a statement and it's not attributed to anybody, it's like, okay. They know a PR firm wrote it, or hopefully, you know, but if you have a good PR firm, they're going to tell you, you know,
needs to come from a person.
I have to manage it. We got to have this person out front right away. In fact, like we're going to, you know, you could record something, you could put it out, you could go Facebook Live, you could do, you know, get on TikTok. Like you could talk about it immediately if, you know, you're going to do it well. If you're not going to do it well, just shut up and don't say anything. But my point is like, you got to have a plan. That is the biggest thing I want you to take away from it. If a crisis happens, you own it, you apologize, and you fix it. And part of fixing it is absolutely having a plan in place if something were to happen and paying for it. People, shit ain't free. So
if you can't do it, have someone do it for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just like running a business. I'm not going to be the one who's filing my taxes. I'm not qualified for that. Like, could you imagine? The IRS would be here every other day. No.
I could try, but it would not be done well.
It would not be done well. So please do not try and do your own communications. So this was great. I'm really happy. Like, I don't care if any of you that are listening are. This was a fantastic conversation. So I appreciate being able to bring in Maddie's perspective. And now, you know, it's even more powerful on because she sits on the other side, like she's gone over to the dark side, the PR side. So, yeah. So it's even more like it's you can see both sides, which is,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
any parting
absolutely.
words?
No, I would just say to like I also just want to say like not every crisis is created equal. Obviously, we brought up some pretty intense ones
Big
here,
ones.
but I will say it could be anything as small as like the whole like oh my gosh, Stanley, like the Stanley thing that happened where
Mhm.
someone was like it wasn't even it was an external thing, so it was easy for them to respond to, but they did the right thing and now they got all this public really positive
They
stuff.
also finally put women on their board, so that was good. So they
Exactly.
started to reach the female population.
Yeah.
Basically all the women that are carrying around these giant cups full of liquor, because that's what we know you have in it. So it's fine, as you should.
That's why we
It's,
like them all so much.
yeah, exactly. If only you could have seen Maddie's Stanley Cup. All right, you guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you tune in more often because we're fucking awesome. And we'll see you on the download.